So when I was asked to do this, I thought I would come up with kind of a fun topic and something that relates to my journey in leadership, which has been a really interesting one. So I thought we would talk about how to design your ideal life. So I thought it would be helpful. I know Kathy gave a quick introduction of who I am, but who else am I? Because I really serve a lot of roles in the world. I have a very kind of complex life. So if you read a bio of me online, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a business person, and I'm a community leader. And if you're part of my family, I am primarily super aunt is my main role. I have 9 nieces and nephews and a great nephew, and I try to spend as much time with them as I possibly can. And then I am also a sister and a daughter and a friend to many. And then the other things that I'm a wine nerd. I reorganize my wine collection like once every month or so and line it up by vintages and labels and all kinds of interesting things and learn as much as I can, which I kind of do about just about anything I get involved in. I am an avid scuba diver, and I am also a scuba dive master, which means I help teach scuba diving and can lead groups of people in the ocean and hopefully not get them lost. So my ideal life, and let me talk a little bit about why I started this journey and why it's been impactful. So when I was about 30, I realized that I was having a very difficult time managing all of the things in my life. And I realized that if I don't take care of myself and don't create a life I want, I'm going to have a very difficult time taking care of the startup I had and the community organizations I was involved in and my family and all of the other things in my life. And so I decided to hire a life coach for my 30th birthday. And it started out as a 6-month engagement. I ended up keeping her for about 2 years full-time, and then kind of part-time for 3 or 4 years after that, and used her in sort of a consulting or ad hoc capacity. And there were 2 things that I primarily got out of that experience. One is living life with intention. So really figuring out what you want your life to be and then creating a plan for that. The second was to eliminate noise. And by noise, I mean things that aren't necessary in your life that you tend to just do anyway. So one of the things I realized the other day as I was sorting through these slides is something I don't say anymore is, if I have time. So I've gotten to the point in my life that if it is important, I make time for it. And if it's not important, I don't make time for it. So I have pretty much eliminated that phrase from my vocabulary, and it's been a really interesting shift in kind of how I live my life with intention. So things my life includes. So I have a business called Via Vero, and we, for the first 8 years we were in business, primarily served billion-dollar-plus companies doing accounting projects. It's very sexy work. And we did some interesting stuff. So here in town, when Express and DSW went public, we helped with their financial reporting. We've done a lot of acquisition integration work. We do process improvement work. And it was quite an interesting journey with my company. So in 2007, I was working at Nationwide, and I was applying to MBA schools. So I'd applied to Harvard and Chicago, and I also had a business plan to start this business with a group of partners, but we didn't have any money. And I got a call from a friend as I was in my application process, and the friend said, so I think I've met some people who would be interested in being your investors. And so I was faced with this decision of what direction to go. So as I mentioned, I have this company, so that's the direction I ended up going. So started the business in January of 2008. So if you know what happened in 2008, you knew that we did not know yet that we were in for a really interesting experience. On top of which, I had never run a business before. I had never dealt with investors before, and I had never dealt with business partners before. And I had 3 local business partners and 5 investors, 2 in Pittsburgh, 2 in Canada, and 1 in Florida. So we had 9 people trying to make decisions for a startup that didn't have enough money going into a recession. We ran out of money several times. By the end of 2009, we exited 1 local partner. In early 2010, we exited another local partner. And then the person I would refer to as my co-founder, who is this wonderful woman named Rachel Cavanis, Rachel and I decided we were going to buy the majority equity back from the investor group. So we started down this process in early 2010 of buying equity back. And then in 2012, Rachel decided that entrepreneurship just wasn't for her. And so she decided she wanted me to buy her out, and then came back and worked for me for a year and then moved on to another organization. So the company went through a total of 7 equity transactions between 2010 and 2014. And then in February of last year, I sold half of the company to a regional public accounting firm here called GBQ. And so we formed a joint venture, and today my business doesn't look anything like it did for the first 8 years, which is terrifying to me at moments, and I have a little bit of an existential crisis about it sometimes. But I get past that pretty quickly because now it's a really interesting business, and we're doing some things that are fundamentally very important to me in the community. So for example, we've started working with entrepreneurial companies. So one thing I noticed is many entrepreneurial companies don't have a basis in kind of structure and control and risk management and finance. So we actually have just launched a service called the Entrepreneurial Services Group that is accounting in a box for companies who are just starting who need financial support. And we do everything from hosting their accounting system to bookkeeping services to part-time CFOs to tax compliance. So through this joint venture, I've been able to kind of start this opportunity to serve a group that is really, really important to me in the community. Other things, so I mentioned I teach scuba diving. I spend a ton of time with my family. Last year, I became an ordained minister to marry 2 of my friends, which has been a really fun journey. I read, I run, I swim. I'm really involved in the community, and I pretty much say yes to anything I've never tried before just for fun. And really, to live all of these things, it takes this combination of intention and strategy to make that work. So here are a couple of the pieces of my life over the last year. That is me and a really big fish named Napoleon. He's actually a Napoleon wrasse, which is a member of the grouper family, and that was taken in Micronesia. And that guy weighs about 400 pounds. So this trip was the one that really kind of set me off on the journey to become a dive master and actually pursue that as a semi-professional path in diving. And then the picture on the left is a little girl named Julie in the middle. So Julie has an optic nerve tumor that is incurable, and I met Julie through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And my sister and I hosted a fundraiser last year to send Julie and her family to Disney World, and then also sent one other family on a wish trip. And now her mom and I are talking about doing some business stuff together, and they've really become kind of a part of our family. So really, you know, I wanted to show you a couple of the things that are kind of evidence of these things that I get involved in. Has anyone ever heard of this concept of finite and infinite games? So I just read this book by a guy named James P. Carse, and he is actually a religious scholar, although the book doesn't have much of a religious connotation to it. But the whole book is about game theory. And the idea is that in our lives, we all play what he would describe as finite and infinite games. And a finite game is one that has a defined beginning and end to it. An infinite game is one that, in my words, I would describe as a journey. So I think it's an interesting concept to really apply to what you're doing in life. And one of the things that I have noticed recently is that I have finite and infinite games that are actually in conflict with each other that I'm working on right now. So for most of the time since I started this journey when I was 30 about how to create this life, I have tried to play an infinite game. Meaning it's not as much about I want to make this much money or I want to do this thing, although there are pieces of that like my dive master certification. It's really about I want to do work I enjoy in my business and in the community. I want to have fun and I want to spend time with people I care about. And I would consider that an infinite journey. So an interesting thing has happened with this transaction I mentioned I did with my business last year with GBQ. So with that transaction, I will be with GBQ for a total of 5 years from the point of that transaction. So I now all of a sudden have a finite game I'm playing that, you know, February 11th of 2021, I will be making some decisions about what the next stage in my life is. But I also have things I want to accomplish until then. I want to launch new services for my business. I want to expand geographically. I want to do all of these things I can to really maximize the value of my business, which is a little bit in conflict because to really maximize the value, I probably need to give up some things in my personal life, which is my infinite journey that I play every day. So I haven't figured out the answer to this yet. It really becomes almost a daily negotiation with myself about what I think I'm going to do about it. Zero-sum games are kind of an interesting concept too. So a zero-sum game meaning that someone wins and someone loses. So I have figured out that that is not always the case. Like for my business, most of the companies like ours I see, they try to figure out where their competitors are and go take their business. But I have this fundamental belief that there is actually an abundance of business out there, and there is an abundance of many things in life. And so I've really tried to focus on trying to find that abundance versus the competitive piece of I win, you lose. So it's been really interesting, and I've been really inspired. I don't know if you saw in the business news, there's a company called Cover My Meds that was just acquired by McKesson for $1.4 billion. So I had the opportunity to sit down with Matt Scanlon, their CEO last year, who is also a scuba diver, by the way, although he likes cave diving, which is really kind of strange and terrifies me. I think it's a little dangerous. But I sat down with him and I was like, you know, what are you excited about with this business? I mean, obviously you guys are growing, you have this cool office space, you do free lunches for your employees, you've created this great culture, but what is it about the business itself? And he said, because we're not playing a zero-sum game. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we've created this software that allows people who need prescriptions to get access to it that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So this pre-authorization process is allowing people to get prescriptions they couldn't get. So they're not taking revenue from anyone because these people didn't have the prescriptions before. So they have literally built this massive organization where they have not taken business from anyone. So I was really inspired by that concept, and to see it on that big of a scale, I think is a really impressive thing. Part of all of this, and I just mentioned negotiating with myself, is really understanding negotiation tactics. And this comes in play with employers, it comes in play with family, it comes into play with yourself. So knowing what are the really important things that you need in your life, or in your business, or in your work career, and what are you willing to give up? And there are typically things you have to give up. I mean, there are always going to be some sort of trade-offs. So I thought I would talk a little bit about some of what mine are. So I work a lot. I work 60 to 80 hours a week and sometimes even more. But the way I work is kind of interesting because I don't dread Mondays ever, and I don't look forward to weekends. And my life is very fluid in all of the things I do. So for example, this weekend I worked Saturday and Sunday mornings, but I took Friday afternoon off to go work at the dive shop for a little while. And it becomes a little bit about just real fluidity of life. So, you know, we hear about this phrase work-life balance, which I don't know that that actually exists necessarily. But I heard someone describe it the other day, and I kind of adopted this because I like it, to think of your life in terms of fullness and not balance. So it's not about trying to weigh, I have this many hours for this and this many hours for this. It's really about, is my life full? So am I doing things that fulfill me? Am I doing things that move me? Am I doing things that inspire me? And if you're doing those things, what I have found for myself is it doesn't matter how many hours I spend on them because I'm doing things I love, I'm doing things that are meaningful, and I'm doing things that are important to me. I also have a lot of flexibility, and that helps too. So I don't like mornings at all, but I'm very excited to be here with you all today. So I tend to go into work at 9 or 9:30 every morning. And a slow start to the morning is one of the biggest things I have figured out for my schedule that is really important. So I like to get up. If I'm going to work out, I try to get it in the morning. I make some coffee. I catch up on my email. I review my priorities for the day. Sometimes I read a few articles. And I just take my time because I have learned that that really sets the stage for me for the rest of the day. You know, and the flexibility, like I just mentioned with my schedule, you know, Friday at the dive shop and then working on the weekends, learning how to kind of just juggle all of those things has been really important in making all of this work. So speaking of negotiations, those two up there are the hardest negotiations I have on a regular basis. So that is my nephew Chase, who's 4, and my niece Lexi, who is 6. And Lexi is probably the best negotiator I've ever seen. Now, it doesn't help that she's so cute, so I feel like I always have to say yes to her. But what I get from her is, okay, so why can't you spend the night tonight? Because I have to work tomorrow. Well, can you work here instead of in Columbus? Well, maybe. Well, how about if you always work here instead of in Columbus? Well, I can't really do that, but I think you can. Okay. Or, you know, we'll get this conversation of, all right, well, I want you to spend the night. Okay, but here's the deal, Lexi. If I'm going to spend the night, tomorrow morning, you can't come wake me up at 6 a.m. to do origami puppets. And I need 2 hours to work, and I have to exercise. And she'll say, okay. So the picture below I put because I think this is really a fun kind of thing about how my life has worked. So as I've tried to create this fullness and as I've figured out what my non-negotiables are, which one of is having regular exercise in my world, my niece and nephew understand now that that's part of my routine. And so when I come see them, they say, what kind of exercise are we doing tomorrow? So their favorite one right now is the 7-minute workout. Lexi thinks she wants to do it 7 times, which is really like a minute of 7 different sessions of it, which is fine. The other thing, so this was a day I think we were doing 7-minute workouts and then yoga, because she likes to do yoga too. And we did not intend to coordinate the shirts that we were wearing, but I think it just makes the picture even better. And then that's my sister, who is my best friend in the whole world, who is the mother of those 2 adorable children. But I put this up because these are some of the negotiations and trade-offs, and these are important people to me that I spend life with, but figuring out a way to integrate the things that are important has also been really key. So, this is one of my favorite quotes, and it sounds a little harsh when you first read it. So, relentless pursuit. Doesn't mean you're trying to kill yourself, doesn't mean you're trying to kill anybody else and getting done what you need to get done. But what I like about it is this quote of, work like someone is working 24 hours a day to take it away from you. That's not necessarily, I don't interpret it to be as much about competition as much as I interpret it to be about intention. And that you are the person who is in control of what you want to do with your life. And to be intentional and work towards that all the time, as if someone is trying to take it away from you, is what will really fuel you forward to where you want to be. So I thought I would cover some kind of tools to live by and things that are important and interesting to me. So I mentioned a few minutes ago finding the non-negotiables. So these are the things that you have realized are really foundational to make your life work. And they come in a number of categories. I thought I'd cover a few for me in personal and a few in business. My personal non-negotiables go like this. I need 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. I thought for a really long time, especially when I was working in public accounting, I could get away with 5 or 6 hours. Turns out I am not a very nice person if I have 5 or 6 hours of sleep. I am a very pleasant person and very balanced and calm if I get 8 or 9, so 8 or 9 is really what I need. I need to exercise almost daily. With all of the things in my life, it keeps my stress level down, it keeps my energy level up, so that has become a real non-negotiable. And it's something that I actually schedule into. If I start to see my schedule is filling up, I will schedule it into my day on my calendar to make sure that it has a spot. Healthy eating for me. So I eat probably 80% vegetarian. I know certain foods that don't do well for me, and I also need to eat regularly. It's kind of like the sleep thing. So if I don't eat every 4 or 5 hours, you really don't want to hang out with me because I'm not very nice again. And then I need quiet time. So what people often don't know about me is that I am an introvert. And so I am an introvert who has learned to be an extrovert for business. But if I get to a Friday that I've had a busy week, I will hibernate for 2 days and no one will see me. And it's not about sleeping, it's just that I need quiet to really be able to recharge and kind of refresh. The other thing I need is regular breaks. So someone described for me once that my work style is what someone would call sprint and pause. So basically what that means is I will, if I have a project I'm working on or a goal I'm trying to hit, I will work very hard and just go at it until I get there. And then I need a break. And sometimes a break is just an afternoon that I'm not working. Sometimes a break is a couple of days off. And sometimes a break is I'm going to go to the other side of the world and dive for 10 days and you're not going to hear from me. So it all depends on kind of the magnitude of what I'm doing. Started our GBQ transaction in October of 2015. We finished it in February 11th of 2016. We did integration and moved into their offices May 1st, and May 10th I left for the Maldives for 10 days and was pretty much off the grid. I was on a live-aboard dive boat that doesn't have internet or cell phone access. So I didn't even have an option to be in touch with anyone. I have to tell you, if you've never had that experience, the first 24 hours is terrifying. So what is going on in my life? Where is my email? Like, is anybody texting me? Is anybody calling me? And then by day 2, you put your phone away. And I noticed it took probably a solid month for me to even be on my phone very regularly after that, which was kind of an interesting experience and a nice break. Business non-negotiables look a little bit different for us. basically, the non-negotiables in my business are our core values. So service, authenticity, and partnership are the Via Vero core values. And we are really big on those. We talk about them daily. We talk about them when we're doing client negotiations. We talk about that if we're managing tough projects. And we talk about it with our consultants to make sure they're living them. And they're important enough that those are our single most fireable offenses. So if someone is underperforming, we will work with them and do everything we can to get them up to speed if they really want to be there. But if someone violates our core values, that is one thing someone can get fired for pretty much immediately. And then be a relentless jerk about it. So the deal with that is no one's going to come to you and say, I think that you really need to do these things to take care of yourself. You really have to own that process. And for me, for the business, I am really the keeper of the values as the head of the business, and I need to be the one who's really enforcing that. All right, so more tools to live by. So time management is a big thing for me. I have something I want to read you, but I will tell you my single best time management trick, and it saves me a couple hours a day, and it is really hard to get used to if you don't do it already, but I'll share it with you. It's called Inbox Zero. Does anybody know what Inbox Zero is? Inbox Zero means that at the end of every day, there are no emails in any of your email accounts. So I have 5 email accounts. In addition to my business, I do consulting for startups and early stage companies. So I have one I'm working on right now that we're doing a turnaround and headed into a sales process. I have one that I just wrapped up with that was an investor-led startup that we got to sustainability. And that's in addition to all of those other things that I have going on in my life. They have their own email accounts that come with that. So the way Inbox Zero works is this, and I'll give you a quick overview. You can follow up with me if you want. We have a whole training. It's a requirement for my team. Everyone on my team has to practice this. So I'm happy to send it to you. But basically what it is you touch every email only once. And the way you do that is, so you open an email and you read it. And if it was just an FYI, if you think you need it for later, you file it somewhere. And if you don't think you need it, you delete it. If it has something to do in it that takes less than 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes to respond, you do the thing or respond to the email and then delete or file it, whichever you need to do. If it has something in it that's going to take longer than 2 minutes, then you figure out what that thing is and you put it on your to-do list to be prioritized later. And then you file or delete the email as needed. And then everything else is pretty much a delete, because if you don't need to keep it for something later, you don't need to respond to it, or it's not informational, you just delete it. What I have noticed that does for me is I used to go back and read emails 5 times, 10 times, and I did it the other day. I caught myself, I had 6 emails in my inbox. I read all of them probably 10 times, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I know better than this. I train on this. I teach my people to do this. But it probably saves me 2 or 3 hours a day in terms of just wasted time rereading emails. The other thing it does is it helps enforce my priorities. So when I do planning, I'm laying out my priorities on a daily basis. And it's really easy to take something that comes in as email and think that it's urgent and important, but it's probably more important to the person who sent it and not necessarily urgent in the grand scheme of things. So by putting it on a to-do list, then you can really take a comprehensive look at all of the things on your list and really figure out what's important and start with those. So somebody sent me an article the other day that I thought was just amazing. So I wanted to share it with you, and it's fairly short. It's called The Answer is No by a guy named Todd Bryson. The answer is no to late night drinks, to a 90-minute lunch in the middle of the day, to water cooler gossip, to the 2 hours of small talk on the plane, to the party after the party, to the meeting you don't need to be in. The answer is no. If you want to create things that matter, things that really matter, you'll have to get used to saying this. This isn't about being an aloof artist, which you can't afford to be. This isn't about being the entrepreneur who checks out from all the relationships you have, which is suicide. This is about rejecting those who want your physical presence in order to pour into those who need your emotional presence, because no one is going to give you the time to create. No one is going to say, George, I heard you're trying to make it as a photographer. Why don't you go outside sometime between 1 and 3 today and leave your desk and get some great shots for your portfolio? That doesn't happen in this world. Instead, you'll have to cut off some of the things you're currently saying yes to. And this doesn't mean you're a jerk. This means you're conscious about how few minutes there are on this planet. This means you're willing to sacrifice some short-term pleasure for long-term impact. Stop complaining about how much of your time is already spoken for and start figuring out a way to get it back. It doesn't have to be morning, but I'm sure you've got some minutes there. It doesn't have to be lunch, but I'm sure you can sneak away for a bit then. It doesn't have to be at midnight, but you can sure make progress when everyone else is sleeping. Your hours of quiet are not going to appear suddenly. You have to fight for them. So an entrepreneur friend of mine sent that to me, and I thought it was just really fascinating. I put up here eliminating tasks from your routine. When I started really getting into living by priorities and figuring out where I need to spend my time, I mentioned that I've kind of eliminated the if I have time thing from my vocabulary. One of the things someone said to me, one of my mentors said is, I want you to go back to your office and throw away your to-do list. I was like, why would I do that? Because the important things will surface again. Well, I was too terrified to do that, but here's what ended up happening. So I started really paying attention to the priorities, and I noticed a trend that there were certain things I kept putting to the bottom of the priority list over and over and over again. And they were probably things that came in through email. So I had my main things I was focused on for business and life, and then other kind of longer term projects that I was looking on, which is kind of the way I organize it. And then there's other stuff. And after I move something to the bottom and it never makes the daily list 5 or 6 times, I just delete it. Because if it's not important enough that it ever becomes a priority, I've realized it's probably just not important enough, period. Daily, weekly, monthly life planning. So I think this is really important. I plan my next day at the end of every day. So I take a look at my priorities list and where I'm at. We already know my inbox is empty, so that's awesome. I look at my calendar to understand what my meetings are, which also helps me figure out my exercise and food schedule. I figure out what the weather's going to be so I know what I'm going to wear, so that when I get up in the morning, I don't have any decisions to make. Because we know I don't like mornings. It's a bad time to make decisions. So that way I can kind of go on with my day. But last year was the first year I really did kind of bigger life planning and figured out I wanted to throw in a few kind of fun goals that I wanted to accomplish and get involved in some things I hadn't been involved in before. So I actually kept a list on my phone through 2016 of what I did, and it looks like this. 2016 accomplishments. Completed a transaction for my business, saved 2 companies, learned to love yoga. I've done probably 6 12-week beginner series in yoga. And every time I do it, I get to the end and say, I'm never doing that again, I hate yoga. And then a few months later, I'll be like, I really want to like yoga, so I'm going to try it again. And then I get to the end and I'm like, I don't really like yoga. So I discovered aqua yoga this year. Has anybody ever done aqua yoga? So you do it on this mat in a pool that's connected to the lane lines. And so you're doing this crazy stability on top of yoga. And you're in your bathing suit. And I love the water. So I learned to love yoga. It's not real yoga, but I like to say that it's real yoga because I feel better now that I actually like yoga. I became ordained and officiated a wedding. I visited 1 new country, 1 new ocean, and 3 new islands. I raised the money to grant wishes to 2 children. I became a dive master, and I kayaked through the world's largest bioluminescent bay, which was one of the coolest experiences in my life. There's 6 bioluminescent bays in the world. There's one in Puerto Rico on an island called Vieques. If you ever have the opportunity to go there, it's fantastic. It's all these little sparkly things in the water. It's amazing. So let's see here. So 2017. This is a place called Wakatobi. This has been on my dive bucket list for 5 years. And I finally decided in early 16 I was going to find a way to get there in 2017. I leave November 2nd for Wakatobi. And Wakatobi is a 2.5-hour flight east of Bali in Indonesia. It is a marine sanctuary, and the buildings you see there are the only ones on the entire island. And there is no Wi-Fi. Another one of those trips. So this isn't just about having the time and money to take this trip. So we did this transaction for the business last year. We're growing very quickly. I have a team. I have business partners I'm responsible for again. So this really comes down to, how do I need to set my life up in order to be able to take a trip like this? So I really had to look at the business and figure out a few key things. And this came from a business coach I worked with for a while who was really impactful in my business. So do I have the right people in place? And are they living our core values? Do I feel comfortable that if I'm not there kind of keeping an eye on things, that everything's going to work smoothly? Are we covering the right functions? And this has been really tough for us as we've changed our services because it just looks different. We have a different service delivery model. We're looking at different technology in how we do service delivery. And so do we have the right functions in place? And then how are our processes? Are our processes well documented enough and tested to know that if something comes up and there's no one to ask about it, there's something they can pull out and be able to look at it? And then there's also what I like to call the backup plan, which is basically if all of those things fail, what happens? So I was really excited. I was about 2 months ago, I was very nervous about this trip. Now I feel like we are in a place where we have all of those things that have responded to the new service lines that we've launched. The new team members, I think, are coming along and really understand the core values. So I feel like we're there. So as beautiful as this is, and as much as it's about just being able to take the trip, there's a lot behind that that is symbolic for me about where we are as a business and how to make that possible. So another important piece of all of this is really being resilient. There are a lot of people who are, I'm not going to say why I think that they're not supportive of things like me leaving in the middle of the day to go to, the dive shop and work, but I think people who haven't taken the time to really design their life and figure out what their flexibility looks like get a little envious of that and can be kind of naysayers, and I've run into that a lot. I've also had a couple of interesting things people have told me over the years that I would call rules that I've broken. And I wanted to share some of them with you because I'm going to say them and they're going to sound ridiculous, but these are things that people have said to me in business or in my personal life. One is, a woman can't be successful unless she has a husband at home who gives her permission to be. That was my big brother. And my grandfather looked at him and said, I think you have a sister who's going to prove you wrong on that one. You can't be a woman and run a successful business. I've heard that a number of times. Not long after about a year and a half after we were in business, we had hit $1 million in 2009, which was great post-recession. And one of the leaders in the accounting world in Columbus went to lunch with my partner and I and said, so I'm really surprised you've been as successful as you are given that you're women. And he actually meant it as a compliment. But the fact that we're still having those kinds of conversations is just amazing to me. You have to have an MBA to have a successful career. I don't have an MBA. I consider my career to be successful. I like that one. And then this one is more personal. On a date with a doctor, I had this guy tell me, you can't have a successful relationship and still own your business. So if we're going to date, you're going to need to get rid of it. So I like to break the rules that people tell me. And then the other thing I put up here, so no, that was I left before dinner was over. It's just business. So the phrase is a little bit different with your personal life, but it's just business applies in a number of ways. One of the things I found is that when I started doing the side consulting work, I was doing a lot of free work because I was excited about the work I was doing, and I had a hard time asking people to pay me. Like I was dealing with these $1 billion plus companies with Via Vero and having no problem like, hey, here's your invoice. But for some reason, when it came down to me doing personal consulting, I had a hard time with that. So I really had to come up with you know what? It's just business. So, hey, here's a contract. Hey, that's out of scope for what we're doing. I'm happy to do it, but here's what that looks like. Hey, I haven't received your payment. And really understanding what are my boundaries related to those things. I had a consulting client not long ago who was like, we don't have a lot of money right now. Can you work for free for 6 months? No, I can't. But call me when you have money again, and I'm happy to be re-engaged. So really being able to know those boundaries and just understand, it doesn't make you a bad person to say no to something that doesn't make sense when it comes to business or an employment situation or even your personal life. It was okay for me to say, no, I'm not going to sell my business to date you. All right, coaches and mentors. I think this is a really important topic, and it doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of this in a lot of ways, but in some ways it does. So I've had a lot of these in my life. Has anyone heard of this theory of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? So there's this theory out there, and it says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. and you are the average in terms of your political views, your social views, your religious views, your financial success, your health and fitness, your relationship success, and your general happiness. So I heard this and I was like, that's crazy. I mean, I don't even know like who the 5 people are. So I sat down and looked at who the 5 people in my life were at that time. And I was like, oh yeah, like, you know, most of them are kind of over here on the left, but I've got a couple over here on the right that are more kind of the business connections. And then, you know, if we look at religion, we've got some people who are very and some people who are not at all. And then, you know, I actually was like, I wonder, I think this person makes this and this and this and this, and I'm probably in the middle of all of this stuff. So I thought it was a really interesting topic. So how that impacted me is I started really paying attention to who am I spending time with. And I think it's actually changed a lot about my life and my business, because as I have figured out where I want to go in life and the type of lifestyle I want to have and the type of business I want to have, I have gravitated towards and intentionally even chosen more friends and business colleagues who fit some of that. And as a result, I have found I have more people who I can talk to about these things. And I have more people now that I can say, hey, let's go for a run together, or hey, let's go to this networking event together, or hey, I want to go hear this speaker, or trading books about different topics. And it's a very different level of interaction than I've had before as I've become more intentional about who those 5 people are. Coaches and mentors are interesting. So I've had a number of coaches in my life. I've had 2 life coaches. I've had 2 business coaches. I have a personal trainer. I try to hire somebody to help me do anything that I'm just not doing well so that I can do it better. And I think that there are different times in your life to use different ones, but I would say I have taken a couple of really important nuggets from each of them. And I've mentioned several of the coaches as we've been talking this morning. The life coach was probably one of the most interesting, and she would call herself an ontological coach. So the science of being, meaning who are you in the world and who are you being in the world? And it's really impacted things like even how I communicate with people. So in all of those rules I was talking about, one of the things I think it's really easy to do is internalize some of that, or wonder if you're doing something wrong, or be angry at the person. So one of the key things she helped me with is, instead of being angry, turn that into compassion. So have compassion, because this person has lived in this limited world where they really believe that thing as much as you don't believe it. So instead of being angry about it, have compassion, be calm about it, and move on. And that's been really impactful. Mentors are also interesting because it's a less formalized relationship than a coach. And I've had a couple of key moments where a mentor has really changed my direction with my career. The first was in 2007. I mentioned I was looking at MBA school versus starting the business. And my favorite mentor I've ever had said, so I'm a little confused here. You're thinking about going to business school to learn how to start a business, or you can start a business. It was all of a sudden very clear. Same thing with the transaction with GBQ. I had another mentor, actually Cameron Mitchell has been a mentor of mine for a while, and I was sitting in his office and I said, so I'm having this struggle because I've started doing this consulting work, and it's work I love, and it's work that fulfills me personally in a different way than my business fulfills me. So I'm kind of thinking, maybe I don't do this transaction, and maybe I start a business just doing this other consulting. And so he walked me through it and was like, I think you're trying to figure out an either or, and it doesn't have to be an either or. It has to be it can be an and. So Cameron has this great phrase that he's known for that goes like this: if less is more, think about how much more would be. And I thought about that, and it really impacted what I did. So I did the transaction, and I kept my side consulting, and now we've launched this service line that is very similar to a lot of the work I do, and I've been able to kind of pull it all together into the best of both worlds. So mentors have made a really big impact in my life. Listen and say thank you is not an Etiquette 101 lesson for you guys this morning. It is because I've realized over the time with mentors and coaches, sometimes you get into a situation where someone's trying to give you advice, but they don't know your situation. And they're trying to give you advice based on their situation or things they think they know. And so I spent a lot of time early in my career kind of arguing with people about it. Like, well, no, because you don't know this about me, or you don't know this about the situation. And the reality of it is they're just trying to share their wisdom with you. And so I have learned to just listen and say, thank you. I hadn't considered that before. And it makes them feel more valued as a mentor than trying to argue with them or tell them that they're wrong, I have found. All right, if I were to choose your takeaways from today, here's what they would be. Play finite and infinite games and know what they are, know what you're playing, and choose which games you're playing. Be intentional about how you live your life. Figure out what you want and create a strategy for it. And then surround yourself with the right people, and people who inspire you and lift you up and who you think can help you get to whatever that ideal life is for you. Questions? You guys have it, right? Yes.
On the life coach side of things, how did you pick the life coach? Is it somebody in the same industry? Is it somebody that's referred to you? What did you look for?
Yep, so the question was on the life coach, how did I choose the life coach and what did I look for? The 30th birthday thing was kind of an impulse, honestly. So my business partner had decided to work with a life coach she met at a networking event. And after a couple of weeks, I was like, wow, this is really changing her life. So I decided to use her. Looking back, I probably should have been a little more intentional about it. I did get a lot out of it. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I have chose my next life coach and then how I chose business coaches, because I think that the process I've gotten a little more intentional about as I've gone on. With a life coach, I think it's important to find somebody who kind of matches a little bit of your style. So what I realized about the life coach I had is that she was a little bit too woo-woo for me, like just a little too out there. And also, I needed somebody who had at least a little bit of business acumen, because that's such a big part of my life, to help me really structure what that looks like. So then the second time I chose a life coach, it was very much, I wanted somebody who had touched business in some way. I wanted somebody who had really gone out in the world and done things. So I'm a travel junkie. I always have this idea that I'm going to go at some point teach diving in Indonesia for 6 months. So I wanted somebody who had really explored the world. And I was able to find that person. And that was really helpful to me in kind of aligning it with where I was going. On the business coach side, the first business coach I hired did not work out well. And I realized it was because, again, it was somebody that my business partner and I had met at a networking event. And she seemed really nice. And so I was like, oh yeah, let's hire her to be our business coach because that's what she does. And it turns out that she had just been trained as a coach but didn't really have any experience in as being a coach or even really working with small businesses. And so we only had her for a few months and it just didn't work out very well because it was a lot of kind of open your binder and fill out this worksheet, and it didn't apply. So when I looked for my second coach, I reached out to my network and I said, I want a coach who has built and scaled a service business and has had a successful exit of at least several $1 million, because that's what I was really focused on. So I found a coach who has built and scaled 3 service businesses and exited 3 businesses within 8 years, and each exit was 8 figures. And so I learned so much about how to scale a business from that, and my experience with him is really what helped set us up for the transaction. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good morning. Your hiring process, how do you do that, and then how do you retain them?
Yep. So the question is our hiring process, how do we hire people and how do we retain employees? So the interesting thing about our industry is that it has, in 2016, was 383% turnover industry-wide. So and it's because we have a big part of a sales and recruiting function, which is very difficult to hire for. My turnover rate is closer to 25% in my company, and it's a couple of things. So we have a lot of team accountability, and that starts in the hiring process. So when we're actually hiring a recruiter right now. We have 3 candidates. I've only met one of them. The rest of the team has already interviewed them. When I meet them, we go through a really non-traditional interview. So I have a list of questions I've developed that are really about a combination of the skills that are needed for the job, and I would say the soft skills, not the what's on a resume skills, and then also just personality traits. So hustle is one of the biggest things that we need because there's a lot of competition in the consulting world. We need to get to things first. Organization is really important for a recruiter spot because you have so many things going at any given time. So an example of a question I ask there is, how is your closet organized? Because what I have found is traits like that are typically pervasive. So if somebody says, so here's my favorite answer I've ever gotten. Well, I rotate it out by season, and then it's organized by sleeve length from short to long, and then by color within sleeve length. Awesome. I know that person is never going to have an email in their inbox at the end of the day. They're never going to lose a document. 5 people who are like, it's just kind of in a pile, but I know where it is. That person should probably just go be an entrepreneur, but it's not going to be a good fit for a recruiter on my team. So we have kind of some non-traditional stuff like that we do. And then we do a 30-day discovery period with all new hires. So for 30 days, all you do is learn. You sit with different team members, you learn the different roles, and we usually know within 2 weeks if somebody's going to make it or not. So yeah, I'm happy to share the interview questions if you want to contact me after. Really interesting stuff, but really fun. Some of them, we picked them up from a lot of different, like from Google and some places that do different alternative interview styles, but it's worked really well for us. And we screen a lot of them, as you can imagine, are related to the core values. So, resilience is important in our world, so I usually stop the interview halfway through and close my pen and say, so if I were to tell you right now you're not getting the job, what would you say? Because the person who says, thank you for your time and I would trust your decision does not have the resilience to be a salesperson or recruiter. The person who says, tell me more about that, is the person I want to hire, or something like that. Or, and then they dig in and they ask questions, and then they find out why I don't think that, which is usually not even true, but sometimes it is. They ask why I don't think that, and then they try to change my opinion of it. And that's a person who's going to be a great salesperson. Yeah. Yes.
So how do you handle glitches along the way? There's hiccups,
Oh.
there's glitches, there's things, because it's so interesting to hear things very organized. It's very cool to hear that, and it's very ideal. I think it would be wonderful to be able to adopt it or several parts of it. But there's glitches and hiccups along the way.
All the time.
So
Yes.
do you have like a certain philosophy or within your leadership style that you are able to deal with those glitches along the way? There are things that you could advise us on that you would say, listen, if you approach it this way.
Yeah. So the question is, how do I handle glitches along the way in all of these kind of structures and processes? So one of the things I always try to do is when a hiccup comes along is just to kind of think about it for a minute. All right, so what just happened? How important is it? I have little glitches that happen all the time. Scheduling issues, somebody cancels a meeting, it throws off my whole day. My lunch doesn't arrive before my meeting, and then we know the hunger thing comes into play. So sometimes it's just a matter of, it's that resilience piece a little bit of just being able to be like, all right, it's going to be okay. Not having lunch when I wanted to have lunch is probably not the end of the world. And then there are big glitches. So interesting story, in 2013, my business partner and I, when she said she didn't want to be part of the business anymore, or 2012, she didn't want to be part of the business anymore, and she let me know that as I was in the middle of negotiating my divorce. So I got divorced from my husband and my business partner within 12 days of each other. About 20 days before that, both of them decided they didn't like the agreements we had come up with, and were like, all right, we have to start over. So that was probably one of the most trying times in my life. And honestly, what I did is I basically cleared my schedule. I set up a routine that I was going to try and sleep in the morning, exercise, eat regularly, make sure I was checking in with my team, and everything else was just about survival and getting through that. So in that case, clear the schedule and focus on just basic self-care and figure out how to get through it, and know that we'll get to the other side. We've had some really interesting financial hiccups in the business. I mentioned we ran out of money a few times. We had one where our largest client is a net 90 payment terms, and they had a glitch in their AP system, so we weren't getting payments for like 100 to 120 days. So I reach out to all my entrepreneur friends and say, okay, how do we handle this? They're like, well, the bank's not going to give you any more money because your line of credit's maxed out. Do you have any credit cards? I was like, yeah. They're like, so first of all, go online right now and open every credit card you don't have and get as much money as you can, because you're going to need it. So that is what got us through this hiccup we had with this payment process with our largest vendor. So when we got to the end of that project, I had $150,000 in credit card debt. And I was terrified because I had also, it was like 4 months after the divorce, like been wiped out in that. And then I had a note that I was paying off my partner. And a friend of mine who is an entrepreneur said, you just have to put your head down and do the work. And when you look up 6 months later, you're going to be in a very different situation. But just do the work and stay the course, and everything is going to be okay. And she was right. So I was just like, all right, here we go. Let's do the work. And that's what I did. Anything else? Yes?
So we have some students in here. What was your first job?
Well, my very first job was,
Or out of college?
oh, okay. Because that's a fun story too, because I had the neighborhood paper route, and then I outsourced it to my sister for cookies that my mom bought in the fridge, and then I collected the paycheck, which was my first, I think, outsourcing, figuring out how to run an outsourcing company. Okay, so my question is, what was my first job out of college? I went to work for Ernst & Young. I had started school as a chemical engineering major and decided a year in that a lab was not where I wanted to spend my time. And so I switched to the business school. I was in the process of getting an MIS degree, and I had to go a year longer because of the sequence of classes. But my last 3 semesters, I only had to take like a total of 6 classes, but they had to be in a certain order. So I decided to go get an internship, and a friend introduced me to Ernst & Young, and so what would have been the second semester of my 4th year in college, I was going to go work full-time for Ernst & Young as an internship. And then through a very funny story of going out drinking with some of the partners, I ended up with a full-time job at Ernst & Young and worked part-time to finish my degree. So I actually started halfway through my 4th year. I started with Ernst & Young in January of 2000, and I graduated from college in May of 2001, and then stayed with Ernst & Young until mid-2004. And actually, I had intended to become a partner there, but I had an aunt who was terminally ill, and so I took a leave of absence so that I could be with my family, and never went back. So it was kind of an interesting process, but Ernst & Young was great. I was terrified because 6 weeks in, I worked my first 23-hour day doing a loan securitization for Lehman Brothers. And I was like, what did I get myself into? But I learned a lot, and it was really an awesome first experience. Yes?
What's one thing you wish you would have known as a college student?
Ooh, one thing I wish I would have known as a college student. So it took me a long time to learn to relax and have fun. So my last year and a half of college, I was working full-time for Ernst & Young, and I didn't make as much time as I wish I would have to figure out what I liked to do to relax and what my other hobbies were going to be, and things like community involvement. I didn't get involved in that until much later. And it was because I just hadn't figured it out. And I wish I would have, because I have many friends who started community involvement through school, and I had worked full-time, and so just didn't really allocate time to it. And it really caught up with me when I left Ernst & Young and went to my next job, and it was a 40-hour work week. And I had this moment of panic because I didn't know what to do with my free time. So I think, I wish I would have explored more, and not just about free time or like how to relax, but I just wish I would have explored more. I wish I would have explored more about places to live or what was going on in the rest of the world. I wish I would have explored more about what was going on in my own backyard and the community there. Anything else?
So let's give them a shout out.